Peace be with you. My name is Alan Kiesler. Welcome to the Institute of All Intelligent Life. Today is Tuesday, 18th of October. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late. I've been struggling with my equipment for the last 10 or 15 minutes. I've not been able to get it to work, but it looks like it's working now. So the class today is a continuation of this discussion of consciousness, and we were describing two different types of consciousness, the limited and unlimited consciousness. And we also are going to continue this discussion now. I'm having problems again with my connection being weak, so if I get cut off or something happens, don't worry. Because I've been having trouble. I wasn't able to get on for the last 10 or 15 minutes, and now we're back. So this is a very, very important issue, of course. And when we're talking about consciousness, we're talking about the soul, the spirit, the human spirit. There are a lot of questions that come up. And the reason for this is that many people have different ideas about what is the relationship of consciousness to what is called the soul or the spirit. And as an approximation, I guess you could say, we can, as I've done, identify consciousness with the soul. Because our consciousness, in which case I'm just talking about our own individual awareness that we all are experiencing now, that is a feature of the soul. And as I explained yesterday, the consciousness is present when we are living, and when we die the consciousness is not present in the body because the soul has left. So I just want to try to explore this question a little bit more about what is the actual relationship between the soul and the consciousness, or the human spirit and the soul. And the one fundamental question that has caused a lot of problems, because different people have different ideas, is what is it that is eternal in the past and eternal in the future, and what is it that, excuse me, I'm having turn off the volume here so that when I get other messages coming in it doesn't make a loud beep. So what is it that is eternal in the past as well as the future about the human soul or the human consciousness, and what is it that is eternal in the future but not in the past, that comes into existence at a certain point? Because I think it's pretty well known to many people that in some teachings the soul is eternal in the past as well as the future, but in other teachings it's not eternal in the past. It comes into existence at a certain point. So this is a very, very difficult issue that we have to face. And I'm going to explain one simple solution to this problem, and that is that we have to define our terms properly. And we can have different definitions because there are different aspects of our human personality. And it's really a matter of choice as to what words, since we're speaking in English, what English words we will use to describe the two different aspects of human consciousness, or the soul, which are eternal in the past, and those that are not eternal in the past. So those features of human personality that are eternal in the past as well as the future, that I am going to choose to use the word spirit, the eternal spirit. In other words, we exist as an aspect or an energy of God eternally in the past as well as the future. But there's also an aspect of ourselves that comes into existence at a certain point. And I'm just going to choose now to use the word soul for that, which in the past I may have used the word soul synonymously with spirit, but I just want to make this distinction now, because this distinction is made by some extraterrestrial sources. That's the reason why I'm talking about it now. So what is it exactly that constitutes the spirit, and what is it that constitutes the soul? So the spirit, that eternally existent aspect of our identity is eternal in the past. It is always present, outside of time. And then there is another aspect of our individuality which is present within time. It begins within time, and that is the soul, which is related to moral choice. So the first time that we make a moral choice, that is when this soul, this aspect of our individual existence, comes into being within the framework of time. So I just wanted to clarify that in case the question was there about what is the relationship of the soul and the spirit. And this is a very, very difficult question and very, very controversial, but I just wanted to make that much clear at this point, that there is information, this is in the Urantia book, this is coming from extraterrestrial sources, which make this distinction, which often is not made within our historical experience, our religious traditions. Sometimes the distinction is not made. And so I wanted to make that very, very clear, that the reason for this dispute or this difference of opinion about the eternality of the soul in the past is because people are talking about two different features or two different aspects of the human personality. One which is the spirit, that word that I'm using, which is eternal in the past, and the other which comes into existence at a certain point. And I am at this time using the word soul for that. All right, so now let's return to the broader question of consciousness. And I'm asking you to please take a moment, because what we are just dealing with here are very, very deep and difficult issues to understand, mainly because of our lack of proper education, our lack of proper training, and because of many misconceptions that have been propagated by different people who may be perfectly sincere, but may not have had a full understanding, or may have had some misunderstanding. So I'm going to request you all to take a minute now and just inhale, to breathe deeply and very slowly, and then exhale very slowly. As I instructed before, if you do this to the count of 8 inhaling and 16 exhaling, counting slowly, that's one good way to do it. So I'm going to do that right now. You can join me if you wish. Can do it one more time. Okay. So what I want to describe a little bit more now is the existence of limited and unlimited consciousness. And as I described yesterday, limited consciousness refers to ourselves, to living beings like ourselves who are aware of what's happening in each one of our bodies, and then unlimited consciousness, which is that awareness that pervades everywhere, really everywhere. Not just everywhere in this universe, but everywhere throughout all universes, throughout all dimensions, and throughout transdimensional existence. That is what we usually call God. And there are many, many sizes, you might say, of the bodies of beings between ourselves and God, and there are many beings whose bodies are much smaller than ours, as we discussed yesterday. So now what I want to enter into, it's a very controversial subject, so please bear with me a little bit, and that is those larger beings than ourselves, those whose consciousness is more pervasive than ourselves. I discussed yesterday how the earth is also a living being who has a consciousness, usually referred to as a she. So Mother Earth we call her, but Earth is also a conscious being, just like we are. Her consciousness extends throughout the entire Earth planet. Then there are stars. There are other planets, of course, also, who also are individual personalities associated with each one of those planetary bodies. And then there are stars, and our sun, of course, is the nearest star, is our star. And the sun, stars also, are individual personalities who have their own consciousness. Now, what is maybe a little bit surprising, but this is also from my own personal experience, and many other people have described this also, in addition to having the body of a planet or the body of a star, those individuals who have that sort of body, they also display, you may say for whatever reason, sometimes in order to communicate with us, sometimes for other reasons too, they also have a body separate from that large planetary body. And we can actually meet those personalities and talk with them. And if you do a little research on this, you'll discover that there are people who have met Mother Earth in the form of a woman. And there are books written about people who have had such experiences. And they're very, very interesting. And as I have described in the past, in about 1979, as I recall, sometime in the late 1970s, I believe it was, I don't remember the exact date, I was able to travel. Again, it was not in this body, but by astral travel, or by out-of-body travel, as we say. I was able to travel to the sun. And I entered into the sun, and I met the personality of the sun, who is in a human-like shape. So now, we're proceeding. The entire galaxy, our Milky Way galaxy, as we call it, and there are many other galaxies. First one was Andromeda Galaxy, which scientists identified only in the 20th century, about 1929. I don't remember the exact year right now, when scientists realized, when they were looking at what was formerly thought to be a star or a group of stars or something out in space, it was realized that this is actually an entire galaxy separate from our Milky Way galaxy. And then gradually, as telescopes were improved, it was realized that there are many galaxies. And finally, as I mentioned yesterday, I think now with the Hubble telescope, they've identified something like 2 trillion separate galaxies, which is a lot more than they ever thought previously. So each one of these galaxies also is a person, also has a consciousness associated with it, and that consciousness pervades that galaxy, just like our consciousness pervades our body. So those personalities are obviously in some way very, very great. Their bodies are much, much bigger than ours. So, but still, as I mentioned yesterday, they are not God. They are practically, we might think of them, because they are the creators of their own galaxies. That is, galaxies come into existence by the activity, by the consciousness, by the effort of those personalities whose bodies are identified with that galaxy. So this is, I used the word previously, a sub-creator. But, and this is a very, very important point, those creators of the galaxies are not God. They're not the original God. They are very, very powerful personalities, but they are ultimately subordinate and servants to the one supreme creator, or the one supreme source of everything. So that may be a little difficult for some people to absorb, but I am simply repeating the knowledge as I've received it, and I may be wrong. I'm just a human being, but I am doing the best I can to understand, to receive, and to transmit this knowledge, which I think is very, very important, is essential for the future of humanity to resolve some of these sorts of questions that have long troubled us. So now I'm going to proceed one step further, which is going to be even more difficult. But again, as I said, this is what I have discovered myself. And as I have told several times, I was very fortunate. It was unplanned by me in advance, but in 2004, when I was at the Monroe Institute session, it was meeting here in California, although the Monroe Institute's office is in Virginia, in the eastern United States. They sometimes have programs elsewhere. And as I had mentioned earlier, the Monroe Institute was founded by Robert Monroe, and its basic teaching is that human beings can learn to travel outside of their bodies. And in fact, Robert Monroe discovered a technology called HemiSync, which is to coordinate the two hemispheres of the brain, because the two hemispheres of the brain often, although they're connected, they often are not acting together in synchronicity. So he discovered this method by which we could synchronize the two hemispheres of the brain, which made it much easier to travel out of the body. So using that technique, I was traveling outside of my body, and I met Robert Monroe. And that means not in his body, because he had passed away a few years earlier. And so we had some discussion, and the one point that he brought up, or I don't remember exactly how the conversation proceeded right now, but we started discussing something that he mentions in his last book, I believe it was his last book, called Ultimate Journey, in which he says that when he was traveling out of his body, he decided to go as far as he could and see what happened, and he wanted to, keep penetrating farther and farther out, and he came to a barrier. And he could not pass this barrier. He could not get over it, or under it, or around it, or through it in any way. And he was bewildered, you can say. He was at first confused, and he was very concerned. What's on the other side of this barrier, and why can't I get around it? So as we were discussing this in out-of-body state, I was discussing with him, I told him, well, let's go back there and try to get through it. I believe we'll be able to. So we did that, and we came to that barrier. You can read his description of it if you want in his book, Ultimate Journey by Robert Monroe. And when we came there, I somehow had the understanding that we can go through this, but it will mean giving up everything, surrendering everything, setting aside even knowledge, all the knowledge that we have, because our knowledge may contain some misunderstanding. So I told that to him. And at first he was a little hesitant, because he is a very knowledgeable man. You read his books, you'll see it's extraordinary, the sorts of things that he was able to do. From our perspective, it's amazing that somebody can, at will, transfer himself or the consciousness or herself outside of the body and travel free from the body, leave the body in one place and travel wherever they want. So Robert Monroe was able to do this, and he was a scientist, he was an engineer, and he was a little hesitant to give up his knowledge. But I explained to him, and again, I am kind of interested myself to understand how I had this awareness that was sort of came to me as we were discussing there. I realized that no, to go through this barrier, you have to be willing to abandon everything. And I understood for him the most precious thing was his knowledge, so I told him that. So then I suggested to him, well, just do it as an experiment, or do it as just to see what happens, just temporarily. Adopt this notion that I'm willing to give up all my knowledge. So he thought about that for a minute, and he said, okay, I can do that. So he set aside all his knowledge, and he set aside everything that was in his understanding, and I took his hand, literally, again, not this hand of this physical body that we have now, but the subtle hand of the subtle body, and the body that we travel in when we do astral travel or we do out-of-body travel, and we went through that barrier. The way the barrier was experienced by me at that point was like it was just millions of sharp, huge blades, swords or big blades slashing like this at every moment. So it looked like it was impossible to get through. But somehow, by adopting a very, very prayerful, humble mood of surrender and willing to give up everything and just having that desire to pass through that barrier in order to understand better what is on the other side of it, we were able to get through it. And as soon as we passed through that barrier, it was amazing. To me it was amazing also that we came out into a different realm of existence, which was bright, shining, and it was illuminated by, I don't know, millions, billions, how many, there were just everywhere we could see, there were glowing spheres, bright, shining, spherical, I don't know what to call them, they weren't really stars, they looked like whole realms of existence, I guess, each one of them. And as I said yesterday, each one of those is immense, much bigger, yes, definitely much bigger than our galaxy, and I guess bigger than our entire universe. I mean, it was just, each one of them was incalculably large. So at that point, what Robert Monroe did almost immediately, he was so intrigued by this that he wanted to go and investigate one of those spheres, and he just took off. And so I didn't want to go with him because that wasn't my intent. I wanted to, I'll tell in just a minute, about what I learned, but he didn't even say goodbye to me. I guess he did thank me as we got through, and then he thanked me. He just said, "Oh, thank you." And then when he looked around and saw he just immediately, just like that, he took off. So I was present at that time in this Monroe Institute program. So when we returned from that experience that each one of us had been instructed how to do this out-of-body travel, using this HemiSync technology, of course. So there was a session that was set aside a certain amount of time, so we were all connected, electronically we were connected, and we had earphones, so then they informed us, now this session is over, so we went back to all meet together. There were about 20 people. So everyone described, or anyone who wanted to, described the experience they had had, and I described, this is what happened with me and Robert Monroe. I had met him, and there were several people there that knew Robert Monroe very well. They were old friends of his, and when I told this story, they said, "Yep, that's Bob." That was exact words, "That's Bob." They said, "This is exactly how Robert Monroe would do things." They could identify that was exactly what he would do. He definitely would just immediately take off like that. So I had other conversations with him, and they also confirmed. It was very nice for me to have that confirmation that I really had met him, because I didn't know him. I'd never met him in the body, and the way he was acting in that condition was something that they could identify as him, as his personality, definitely. So it wasn't very long after this that the session ended. So I wanted to understand, however, a little more, and this is what I'm talking about now, is about what was in those spheres and especially what was the consciousness related to those spheres, those transdimensional universes, transdimensional worlds, which were glowing. They were actually shining very, very bright, a whitish, yellowish, maybe different ones had slightly different colors, but it was basically a very bright white or slightly other colored in it light. So, now this is the difficult point, which is going to be very, very troubling for some people, I understand, but I'm sharing with you, I hope I'm not wrong, I'm pretty confident, that just like there is a consciousness associated with our bodies, just like there is a consciousness associated with a tree or a flower or a microscopic organism even, there is a consciousness associated with all the little bacteria living within our body. There is a consciousness associated with each cell in our body also, which really, if you study, I was actually studying biology at one point. I almost finished my master's degree in biology in 1970, what year was it, 71, 70. At Alabama State University in Alabama, I was studying biology, and I learned a lot. Even at that time, people knew so much by using electron microscopy about the cell. And if you look at what's going on in an individual cell, the way the different parts of the cell are moving, it's like a whole big city, each individual cell. And the different organelles have different tiny, tiny, of course, little parts of them, and the way they move, you would swear that they are conscious, the subcellular parts, because they seem to be so well regulated, just like traffic in a city. So yes, it's true that there's no explanation about what's going on within the cell that's adequate unless we realize there is some consciousness on that level also. So there's consciousness of small, tiny little organisms. There's consciousness of ourselves in our body. There's consciousness of planets and stars. There's consciousness of galaxies. And in the transdimensional existence, there's consciousness which, with each one of those huge, shining realms, which maybe we could call universes, transdimensional universes, because they seem to be unlimitedly large, but they do have a border, so they're not infinite. But they seem to be practically infinite. But in any case, there is a consciousness associated with each one of those realms also. And here's the difficult thing. Those consciousnesses are not only limited to their vast bodies. They are all-pervading. They pervade outside of their individual universes, spiritual universes, transdimensional universes also. So this is a difficult concept. For me, it's very difficult to understand how can that being who has the body of that vast realm also pervade everywhere outside of it. So what it means is that's the different category of consciousness. That's the unlimited consciousness that I was talking about earlier. So, and this is a very difficult concept because, now think of it, this is kind of shocking, don't worry, but it's beyond our mental ability, I think, to really understand this. But this is what I'm reporting for your reaction as you want to react, and I'll take some reactions in just a minute. That those individuals, let us say, who have that all-pervading consciousness, there's more than one of them. And all of them are simultaneously able to interpenetrate their consciousnesses, and they all exist everywhere. Although I'm sure every single one of them has a special relationship with their own realm, but in this way we would have to say their consciousness is unlimited. It's all pervasive. Now, is that God? Well, that's not the original God. But in one sense, because their consciousness is unlimited, our tendency might be to call them by that word, to use that word, God, for them. So I just want to explain, however, that the original God is not to be identified with those individuals. Those individuals who are the, what was the right word, the proprietor or the ruler or the individual who's associated with that realm, they are each individuals. They all each have an individual consciousness, but each one of their consciousnesses is all pervasive. So now I just want to return to a topic that I had mentioned earlier in this course, and that is I talked about the Isle of Paradise. So the Isle of Paradise, which Robert Monroe and I at that time did not see, but my intention was to take him there because I was familiar with it from before. That central Isle of Paradise is, I guess we can say, at the center of that transdimensional existence, and it is different from all of those shining spheres or those shining realms that Robert Monroe and I saw. And this realm is the actual abode of the original God, whose consciousness is not only all-pervading, as is the consciousness of each of those, what's the right word? Again, we don't really have the words for these things, but that proprietor or that master or that leader or that king, we use our own concepts from our experience to describe such beings, but they are all dependent upon that original consciousness, the original creator, the actual God, whom we call Allah, or whom we call, in different terminologies, different languages, there are different words, but we're all talking about the same original personality, original creator, original source of everything. And that being resides in that central isle of paradise. And that is the one true God. That is the original source of all consciousness, the original source of everything else, whose consciousness is all-pervading and who exists within each one of us also, in our hearts, along with us. As the Quran says, closer to us than our jugular vein. So this is a mystery, you might say, that God, the original God, is simultaneously present, literally, is or can be. I don't know. It's totally up to him, I guess, if he wants to be or not. But in some way, that original God is aware of what's happening everywhere, including within each one of our minds and each one of our hearts. So that mechanism is something that we will discuss more in the future, how God acts in that way. But there's no doubt at all that the original all-pervading consciousness is present simultaneously in the original central abode, the Isle of Paradise, which is located in the transdimensional eternal world, and at the same time is present right here with each one of us. And as is said in the namaz, Sami Allahu liman hamida, that God hears those who praise him. So God, if I'm just an individual sitting right here in America, or you're listening wherever you're sitting, God is right there with you and is listening to you. And if you praise him, he will certainly be listening to you. So now I just want to backtrack one step and talk a little bit more about those consciousnesses who are the predominators, the leaders, the sources, in one sense, of those spiritual realms, those transdimensional spheres, which Robert Monroe and I saw. And how is it possible, and this is a really deep question, and I'm going to end with this question, how is it possible that an individual being, an individual consciousness, can be all-pervading, and there can be millions and billions, I don't know what the limit number is, but so many of them, and they are all present simultaneously. So this might seem a little bit mysterious to us, but I can't, say much more about it at this point. But this is something that we do have to understand if we're going to understand the structure of the cosmos. And as I have described from the beginning of this class, we're going to talk about the cosmos, the entire existence, as far as I've been able to become aware of it. And I'm sharing this with you in this way. So please forgive me if I've offended anybody, if I've confused anybody, but I will look now at your comments and see what's your reaction to this. And let me just take a minute to see what time it is. I've gone quite a bit over the half hour that I was usually going to set aside for this, because this is a very complex and difficult issue, but I'll take a little bit more time. Faraz Mubarak says they might be like angels, if possible. Yes, we can say that if we want. I think that there are other categories of consciousnesses which are usually identified as angels, but we can say there are different types of angels. That is, there are angels who exist within this universe also, who, I don't know, I've never actually thought too much about trying to identify angels with some being that we have experienced or learned of from extraterrestrials who are identified, like, for example, as stars. Could angels be those beings who are stars, who also are able to travel in a form, like, as I said, the sun has a form, a human-like form, as a small-sized being, or our sized or slightly larger than us, as well as the huge sun globe. So maybe that's what angels are. Maybe that's one category of angels, who are actually the individuals who are associated with the body of a star. Maybe that archangels would be individuals associated with a galaxy, or maybe the angel word could be used to describe those personalities who are identified with those entire spiritual universes. I guess it's really a question of terminology, what word we want to use. But there certainly are angels of different types, and there are many types of beings which are far beyond our comprehension. What is the key to success? Adil Arif asks. Any tips besides hard work, please? I don't know how that's related to our topic today, but I will just say that for me, I have no doubt at all the key to success is developing a relationship with God and chanting the name of God, whether it's Allah, whether it's Jehovah, whether it's Ram, or of great servants of God. We can also chant their names and meditate on them, and that is the key to success in my experience. So good works and good spirit, or good mentality, you can also say. Sir, how was structure of sun body that you met? Very good question. Thank you very much for that question. His body looked like a human body, and it was glowing, it was shining. And but he had 2 arms and 2 legs. It looked like a human form. Now, whether he took that form in order to communicate with me, or whether that is the form that he has apart from his communication with me, I don't know. But that's the way I experienced it. So let's just see, we have any other questions here? Just hi sir, hello sir, which city you're in. I'm not going to answer questions or points like that. We have another question. Do you love Iraq? Tutataha. I'm not going to go into other topics. I want to talk about consciousness. But I will say I do love Iraq, and I'm very, very pained at what has been done to Iraq by the United States, which there's, interestingly, I'll just mention one thing about Iraq, because I've become aware of this, and I have no doubt at all that it's true, that the reason why the United States invaded Iraq was not what they said, of course, that Saddam Hussein was a tyrant and they wanted to replace him. That's the excuse they used for going into Libya also. They wanted to get rid of Gaddafi because he, of course, both Iraq and Libya had a lot of oil, but Gaddafi also was introducing a new monetary system, gold-based monetary system, which would have collapsed the international banking system. So they went in with the excuse that he was a tyrant. So they went into Iraq with the excuse that Saddam Hussein was a tyrant. Maybe it was they wanted the oil, but more than the oil also, and this is, I don't know if you've heard this before, but I have no doubt that it's true. They also went into Iraq because of very, very advanced technology that was present there, including portals or gateways to other dimensions or to other galaxies or to other stars. So there are places within our universe which are called portals where you can enter and you can come out far, far away, even in a different galaxy. So there are such places present in Iraq, and that is one of the reasons why the United States invaded that country. And it's just horrible. Over 1 million people, evidently, although people dispute that figure, but over 1 million people may have been killed or died. And it's just horrible, horrible what has happened. So, yes, I do love Iraq, and that's why I'm so sad about what has happened there. So, let me just see what other questions we have. Anything else? So, so their question is like us humans. This is a very interesting question. Why is it that I experienced their body as being human-like? Was it that they were displaying that form so that I could accommodate it? I could meet them, I could talk with them? I really don't know the answer to that question. But what I do know is, and this is something that the people who were involved in the secret space program were shocked to discover this. They began meeting people from other star systems, and not all of them were human beings looking just like this, like us, but most of them were humanoid. That is, they had 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, 2 ears, a head, And they were kind of surprised because they weren't expecting this. If you see a lot of science fiction movies, they portray aliens as something like an octopus or a spider, or, with a whole bunch of legs, and may not anything recognizable to us like a head and eyes, But as they began actually traveling to other stars and other planets, the secret space program astronauts met many different types of people, and all of them basically, maybe not all of them, but almost all of them had a very humanoid shape. So you can do a little research, you'll confirm this. And they didn't really understand why. They didn't understand why this was the case. And it may be that this human shape is something very basic. It's not just, as our modern Western scientists say, evolutionary theorists say, that somehow the DNA just happened to evolve in this way and we happen to evolve in this shape. But it may be that there's something more fundamental about the human form than that. And so it's not only that we have this form, but other beings that have developed in other planets also have a very similar form. Some of them identical to ours, look exactly like us. And are they related to us genetically? I don't know, but they do look very much like us. And almost all of them look something like us. So even in that transdimensional world, this human-like form is present. So let's see. Sir, what are you talking about, a dream? No, these experiences that I've had of traveling out of the body are not dreams. Of course, when we dream, that is also traveling out of the body, but you can also travel out of the body when you're awake. And there's a process to learn that. I don't know if you've heard of lucid dreaming, but one way to develop this practice is that when you're asleep and when you're dreaming, before you go to sleep, put this intention into your mind that I will wake up while I'm dreaming. I will become aware. I don't know, you may have had this experience, many people have had this experience, that while you're dreaming, you realize, oh, I'm asleep, I'm dreaming. So that sort of lucid dreaming, it's called, that is a good practice to develop because that helps in learning how to do out-of-body travel when you're awake. So all these experiences I'm talking about, I was fully wide awake, but I was traveling outside of the body. Okay, we have another question here. Asad Rauf Khan says, when you traveled out of body and you were looking down below at your body from the top, what was your body doing? Did it still have part of your consciousness? Well, it's been different at different times. Sometimes, and you can read about this in the literature about out-of-body travel, often the body looks like it's just sleeping. It's breathing, but it doesn't seem to be awake. At other times, in fact, the experience I described once, this was about what year was it? 78, 70, 79, I guess it was, when I was literally up near the ceiling of the room that I was in. And at that time, I was watching my body speaking. My body spoke. But I was not doing the speaking. I was not controlling what was being spoken by my body. But it was moving. It wasn't just lying there asleep. So that was kind of an interesting experience. So that can also happen. So did it have part of my consciousness? Maybe. But I was actually outside of my body. I was looking down at the body. Something else or somebody else was controlling what it was saying. So I would like to comment on, if you know the incident of Miraj by Prophet Muhammad, in which he went to meet Allah physically in somehow the situation that you discussed. Faraz Mubarak has asked. Yes, I am familiar with the Miraj, and I know also that there is a discussion that has been going on for centuries as to whether he was in his body or whether he went spiritually. My understanding is that between the spirit and the body, this body that we talk about, there are other bodies also, which we call the subtle body or the astral body, which is the body we travel in when we dream. So that's also a real body. And whether the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, went in his, what we call the gross body, this physical body, or whether he went in his subtle body, I don't know. I'm just telling you frankly, I don't know. Because I think either is possible. I think that this gross body can also travel like that. I really don't know the answer to that question. But he definitely went, and as it's described, and I accept it, I have no doubt that it's true, that the Holy Prophet, peace be on him, went to meet Allah physically, and whether that physicality was in the gross physical body or in the subtle physical body, or there is also a spiritual body, and how exactly he went, I don't know, but I have no doubt that he did do that. So how does this relate, I guess the question is now. The situation that you discussed, that I experienced myself, was that something similar? Maybe. For me, it's not difficult to accept the Miraj because I myself did something similar to that. I really don't know whether what I have done or what Robert Monroe was doing or what many people have done in traveling outside of the body, if that was the same thing as the Holy Prophet, peace be on him, did. But certainly it's possible to travel through space, and it's certainly possible to travel out of this body also. So what do you think about that occasion? Yes, I have explained that I think that was a definite real experience, but I'm not sure in which body it was that Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, took the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And now another question. Asad Rauf Khan is asking also, how was your own form like when you were out of body? Also, did you have a compulsion of coming back to your body, or you could have left your body forever? Very good question. I was in a human body. I was in a body that looks just like this body. Did I have a compulsion of coming back? I think there have been times when I didn't have any compulsion to come back, and there have been times when I did have a compulsion to come back. In fact, sometimes it seems to be involuntarily that we're pulled back into this body when we're traveling out of the body in the subtle body. But certainly, and many people have described, when they go out of their body, they end up in a place where they don't want to come back. And that certainly has happened to me too, that it's so wonderful there, so pleasant, that you don't want to come back. I can describe some other experiences I've had, and many people who have had near-death experiences. I've also had near-death experience when I probably should have died, but I didn't because I chose not to. I was given the choice, and at that time I chose to come back, although I could have not come back. So again, it's all individual circumstances. But certainly, sometimes there is compulsion of coming back. Some people have described they didn't want to come back, but they had to, they were forced to, or they were obliged to come back, or they were told that you better go back, or you really, would do much better to go back. And at other times, people haven't come back. They have died from our perspective. All right, let's see. Any more questions here? Okay, Faraz Mubarak. It's more like as the dead body in the grave bear reward of his deeds, that will be through consciousness. All right, this is a good question. Again, this is another very difficult issue about the dead body in the grave bearing the reward of his deeds. I'm going to have to take a minute. Or maybe what I'll do is I won't answer the question right now, because this is going to be a very, very long discussion, and it's a very, very important part of our discussion of consciousness, is what happens at death, and what about the teachings of the person remaining in the grave, because some people have that understanding, and other people say no, the soul immediately, or the spirit immediately leaves the body, or if not immediately, very soon. So we'll discuss that topic tomorrow. And Faraz Mubarak has also written that the Quran says he, meaning the Holy Prophet, peace be on him, traveled with his physical body, just for your info. Yes, I'm aware that many people interpret the Quranic statements in that way, but you may or may not know this, but there are a number of very great scholars, great Sufis also, who have understood that body to be not the gross physical body, but the subtle. So there is some disagreement among Muslim scholars and saints also on that question. Okay, so I look forward to tomorrow when we will discuss this very, very controversial topic of what happens when the body goes into the grave, and how does the person experience the reward of his or her deeds when they were in the body in that life. Okay, thank you very, very much. May God protect us all.